Hello, hello. Good morning. Alright, I think we are live. Can you guys see me? Can you hear me? Everything's working alright? Alright, I think I'm seeing the chat, but not sure if there's anyone here. It appears that there's just a few people online. Alright. Um hey Winston. Hey Khalil. Good to see you again, man. Neil, how's it going? Can you hear me? Great. Awesome. Perfect. Alright. So I'm just gonna jump straight into it today because we've been just fluffing around too much for too long on this character. Hopefully today, I reckon between today and the next stream next week, we can call this guy finished. So today we're gonna move a little bit faster. With I will explain things if you need to, if you want me to show you what I'm doing, but I'm gonna try to do it a little bit faster so that we can get more things covered. So today the idea is to work on the mask. Let me just bring it here. Right, so yeah, like I said, today the idea is to work on all of these patterns and the kind of like I'm imagining this area of the mask to go on top of what we already did, and it's going to be kind of like little pieces of chipped wood or little sticks. Not entirely sure what exactly this material is going to be, but I think it's going to be made out of wood, just stuck on top of this area. So that's one of the things that I'm going to be showing you today, and I'm going to hopefully get it done nice and easy with the polygroups. So I'm going to show you a cool technique that is really easy, and it gives a very cool effect. Then we're going to move on into a bit of fiber mesh to do this part, which I was hoping to do last week, but we didn't get to it. Other than that, once we get this done and this, I think we can do a quick pose for the character and then start working on the clothes. And this, I mean, to show you different techniques, maybe we'll just do the beard as fiber mesh. This is getting out of hand. Right, so this will be definitely fiber mesh, but then we can take a look at this, different technique, and we can use nano mesh, just because I can show you something different. And yeah, other than that, we can get started with the face, or with the mask. Ready? Cool. Hey D Austin, how's it going? So if you remember, we had a few duplicates of this mask. Everything is, let's go all low, and there we go. We have a few duplicates. We have a folder that has the originals with a few more of those, just in case. And as I mentioned last week, I like to duplicate the meshes at different stages so that I can go back to a specific point. I can do that with individual subtools, or I can just save incrementally. I usually tend to do both. So let's go ahead and start with the second part, or the second piece, which is exactly the same. Right, so this is the one that doesn't have any thickness, but has the nice topology and all that. So I'm gonna go ahead and subdivide this a few times, about 200,000. I think that should be alright. Let's go ahead and test that out. Yeah, so that's plenty of geometry for what I want to do. Now with this one, I don't want to keep any of the lowest subdivision level because this is just going to be a kind of like a platform to build the next step. So one thing we can do is delete lower, and now we don't have any subdivisions, but we still have all the resolution that we need. The next thing I will do, let's go ahead and go to the lightbox, go to brushes, and I'm gonna bring in, let's see if I can find it. Under the pen, there's a really cool one called the pen sketch or pen sketch should be fine, right? So this one is just a modified kind of like a standard brush that automatically turns on RGB. So it's just a painting brush. So you just select a color and it gives you a very controlled type of type of stroke. It also has trails, so it also helps you with basically you don't have to put as much pressure. The pressure just determines the thickness of it. So it is a very good brush for painting and designing, which is what we're gonna do with the mask right now. Now this brush comes with an alpha, so maybe you can see it here. So when I paint this, you have like this main stroke or this main painted area, but I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there is like a secondary set of strokes here that I don't want to keep. I want a very clean sort of sharp line, and that is because this brush, oops, let me just undo that. This brush comes with an alpha, so we can just go to the alpha, and there you go. This is the alpha that is currently selected. So I'm just gonna select no alpha, and now it's slightly different, but you can still, you know, have a lot of control over it. The only reason I don't like to use the alpha is because again it creates an extra set of lines, and I just want a clean, sharp line. Okay, so let me just decrease the size of my brush. Okay, so this one seems to work all right. I'm gonna go ahead and turn symmetry on, and what I want to do now is start creating kind of like the outline of the different details that I want to create, and that is all there is to it. I have a white color, or the entire object is filled with white, and then just with a black color I'm going to start adding those lines. All right. Eva Pixel, how you going? Hi Pablo, how are you doing? How are you doing that drawing thing? This one. This is like the most asked question from all the streams. This is called Epic Pen. And it's just a very cool application that lets you paint on top of the screen. It's not part of ZBrush. It's just a little thing that sits on top of anything. It's just I put it there for explaining things. Hey Josue, how's it going? All right, let's move on. So what I'll do is, like I said, I'm going to start painting the kind of like the outline of this. I think I want to just like a piece of wood that goes from here from the top. This doesn't have to be like extremely accurate. You can be a little bit loose about it because we're going to refine it later on. This is just kind of setting up the basis. All right, and let's go ahead and start with this kind of like surrounding area. Again, I'm designing as I go, but I'm not sure if I like that. Maybe reduce the size of my brush a little bit so it's not as thick. Alright, and maybe like an outline here. Just creating like a border edge. So again, just to reiterate, I'm not doing anything else other than just painting with poly paint and the pen brush. And this is kind of like the creating the design. Oops. Alright, so those are my main lines. But now that I have these, I can just go ahead and maybe with a smaller size again, not too much. Um, I can go ahead and keep refining the details of this because remember we still have this other piece which has all the details and the wood carving, if you will. Whereas this one is just gonna be like little pieces on like kind of like stuck on top of it of the other one, if that makes any sense. All right, so I'm gonna start with adding like secondary type of ring of like a ring of this color all around. By the way, if you want to have more control, like this is again, it's not super clean, it's not very straight or anything, but again, we're gonna fix it later on, and I want it to be not as perfect. I want it to be quite rough. But if you want to have more control and make like perfect lines, you can very easily turn on lazy mouse, right? And that will give you this very, very controlled line. So it's up to you. Lazy mouse is on the stroke palette, this one right here, and the lazy. Once you enable lazy mouse, you can play with the lazy radius, and that's how long that string, that red string, is really. All right. So I think I want to do another one here, but this time I might connect it there. And there. All right. And just do more here. We're going to have some smaller pieces that we have to figure out how to deal with them in terms of the design again, but for now, just want a rough pass. So, like these corners here, might not want them, so yeah, we'll see about that. This is kind of like a first pass. Again, we'll refine the design itself once we tweak the actual geometry. Right now, this is just painting. But I think I like this as it is. What I'll do is get out of symmetry, and I want to do some cuts. So like the pieces are not, I mean, this is not going to be like a continuous piece of wood or whatever it is. So it's just little pieces connected. So I'm going to cut through there. And this also will help me with the asymmetrical pattern as well, because it doesn't look, perfect. So it doesn't look like much right now. I mean, it's not a sculpting really, it's just painting using poly paint. But once we create the meshes out of these lines, you'll see how powerful this technique is. And you're probably familiar with it. We're going to be using the one of the latest plugins from 2018, I believe it is, called Polygroup It. And it's just fantastic. All right, I think for the outer one, for this one that is closer to the edge, I'm not going to have any cuts, and that could be a slightly different material from the rest, including this kind of like the nose bit. So I'm going to leave it like that, and let's go ahead and let's go ahead and do the inside here. So I'm going to turn on symmetry again, and this is going to be something like that. I'm not sure if I should go for this type of look for the inner side. Now let's just roll with it and see. If it doesn't work, we can go back. You know what? I'm gonna undo that. I'm gonna start from the center or from the eye. The only thing with this technique that you have to, keep in mind, don't worry about the thickness of the, how blowy this looks or the thickness of it. The only thing to keep in mind is basically that there shouldn't be any gaps. So it should be a pretty strong line. So if I go around like this, let's go ahead and do one like that, right? And I just sort of leave it like this could, create some problems. This area right here, because it's not very well defined. So make sure that there's no gaps. So again, this could be just like smaller pieces of wood, like a concentric pattern here. So I think that looks alright. We might, cut these as well into smaller pieces, but I think we're gonna have a few around that we can, maybe we can even delete some. And the idea is to create kind of like a gap in between them. So we'll do all that later on, but that is essentially it. Let me see if you guys have any questions, and we move on to the next step, which is creating the geometry out of this design. Khalid says, I'm wondering how much time you spend on project like this if you weren't on live. Um, I would say considerably less because it's just the fact that I'm like explaining things as I'm going and try to show you something that looks interesting and the different techniques, something that you can take something out of value really. That's the thing that makes it a bit slower. If I were to work on this just on my own, at my own like realistic pace, I would probably get this done in a couple of days, like from the concept to finish, depending on the level of the details as well. Let's say 3 days. I'm not that fast really, but it's gonna be much faster because I would know already what I'm trying to do or what the techniques are, and if there is something that I want to try, then or something new that I want to try, if I want to incorporate a new tool into the workflow, that's gonna extend the time frame really. But yeah, it's definitely these moments, these moments, right, that I'm explaining something or talking about something. That's when I slow down, but it's all part of the process, really. So hopefully, again, I'm doing something that it's interesting for you guys and giving you some tips that you could use in your own projects. All right, so um, Sky Falcon, hi. You just selected the brush and start painting. Yeah, correct. So I use a pen sketch brush. So if you go into the lightbox and go into the pen brushes, you should be able to get it from there. I just disable the alpha that is attached to this brush by default and start painting. This is black and white, poly paint. You can paint with any color really, but black and white is the ideal process for this technique. Side effects, then I guess he will mask by polypaint. That Yeah, that could work. That probably would have been my process previous to Polygroup it, but now I'm going to show you what I do now and what I think this is so powerful. And this is even how you can manually draw loops of topology, creating different polygroups and then retopologize by keeping groups, and it's fantastic. So what I'll do is bring in my plugin, C plugin, put it next to me on the right. Something that I forgot to mention last stream, some of you guys, one of you guys asked something about having the two sort of like trays, that I have two trays on the side. This is actually not a tray, it's just part of the interface. What I did was I brought in one of these large white buttons here, and that kind of like increased my size of this area or like the width of this area, so I can just put more buttons, but this is permanently here. If I close this is still gonna be here. So just so you know, something that I forgot to mention last stream. It was asked in the comments. All right, so then this is an official plugin. So if you go to C plugin and open Polygroup it, this is the plugin that we're gonna use. There are two ways to do it. I mean, there's three ways to do it. The Polygroup it interface will just bring a separate interface where you can assign polygroups based on the seeds. I mean, that's out of the scope of this stream, but that's a really good tool to assign polygroups to hard surface models without having to do like any complex stuff. It's really good because it recognizes different planes and changes in the geometry or angles in the geometry. So it's super powerful stuff. Then we have the polygroup from polygroup it from paint, and then we have the border. So basically, the difference between these two buttons, this one is just gonna try to do an average. So it's gonna analyze the thickness of this line, for example, and do an average and just put a line right in the middle. So it's gonna cut through every single line right in the middle, and it's gonna create basically a polygroup for each one of these pieces, and that's really the one that we're gonna use. If you want to keep the border as well, you can use this one, the border one, and the border one is just gonna do the same thing, but the difference is that it's gonna create a polygroup for each one of these pieces individually, plus a polygroup for the entire set of lines. So depending on the, on what you're trying to do, you can try both, and it's just an undoable operation. So you can click one, and if it doesn't work, come back, and that's it. So I'm gonna, because I wanna have control over the gap itself. I wanna have everything close together, but then I wanna use the move tool probably and just push things apart to manually create that gap. I'm gonna go for the first one, for polygroup it from paint. So let me just show you what's gonna happen. I'm gonna turn on polyframe. I'm gonna turn off the lines, and actually I'm gonna hold Control W, and Control W just assign an entire polygroup to the mask, and I'm gonna click on polygroup it from paint. So it shouldn't take too long. There we go. So that's it. That's the whole process. I mean, you can do mask by polygroups, mask by polypaint, and then split. I mean, there's 3 or 4 different ways to do all these in ZBrush, but like just polygroup it does a really good job. Magic in a single click. That's right. Comics Legend, do you recommend to model with Dynamesh or just using Sculptris Pro only, or a combination of both? What would be the recommended workflow for best practices? Either or, whatever works for you. So Dynamesh and Sculptris Pro are essentially the same thing. Sculptris Pro, you can think about it as a localized Dynamesh, that you don't have to redynamesh the entire model, so you can just add specific details in areas. So what I would do is I start with Dynamesh because it's faster. Like I can do, push things really fast, and then it gets to a point that I want to add a bit more detail or define things a little bit better with still the sketch of the model. Then I would use the Sculptris Pro to just add more details in just the areas that I want. And once I have the sketch complete, then I can do a retopology or do a ZRemesher and then project the details and continue like cleaning it up. That would be kind of like the process. But it's up to you really. Just keep in mind that let's say if you have something like this and you just want to do a tiny little detail here around the eye with Dynamesh, so you'll have to increase the entire, like the resolution of Dynamesh and redynamesh the entire model. Whereas if you already have a good base that you did with Dynamesh and you just want to add some details, you can enable Sculptris Pro and work with Dynamesh localized. That's kind of like the power of that. What is the pen sketch that you're using? It's called, no, the sketch pen. I think Eva Pixel is asking about the actual painting tool. It's called Pen Sketch, which is on the lightbox. Go to brushes, and there's an entire folder called Pen, this one here. So I'm just using, I think, yeah, Pen Sketch here. So just double click that and it will load it, and that's it. If you're referring to this little thing, again, this is Epic Pen. That's just to draw on the screen. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So now that I have this, what I can do is a couple things. Let's say that I want to keep this design. This is what I've been doing for like a few times. I'm going to duplicate it. So this is the one that has the poly paint and the groups, and I'm just going to drag this into the OR, which are original files. And then with this one, I'm just going to select a white color, and I'm going to fill the object, right? A few times. Cool. So now I don't have the lines. I just lost all the poly paint that I did. Well, I didn't lose it. I just like paint over with white color, so I don't see the lines, right? You can also just turn this off, but I want to start with this clean. So now I have a better idea of how these polygroups are looking. Pretty rough, but that's again something that we can fix relatively quickly and just smooth this out. So before I do that, I'm gonna see if I can show you something cool, and if I remember where it is. I think it's on the draw. Yeah, here we go. So if you go to preferences and go to draw, there is this slider here where you can change how the polygroups look like. So I can just take this polyfill color opacity and just crank it up to 100. See, so this is just changing the feel of the polygroup, which is pretty cool. So let's say by default it's 50, but if you want to be able to see them really easily, I can change to a skin material and have like these very bright colors. So you can do that from the preferences. All right, so now I can see how pixelated and crappy this looks, but that's fine. Everything looks good. I have different polygroups in different areas. Let me just double check a few ones, like this. Yep, this is its own. I'm just holding Control and Shift and clicking to make sure. Yeah, because this one looked like is the same, but it's not. So I'm gonna just give it a different color, and just so that visually I have a better idea. Maybe this yellow one. Perfect. So I think we are in a good shape to move on. So the way that you can clean this up is you can do it in a few different ways. You can use the deformation palette, which probably I'm going to use. You can also use a brush. I think I showed it to you guys in a couple of streams ago. It's called the Smooth Groups, and it's basically a smooth brush that will only smooth the lines of the groups. It's not going to affect the volume really. So it's just going to smooth this area. So I'm going to get closer so that you can see what I'm going to do. I have it in a custom palette here. So it's called Polish by Groups, but for you guys should be on the deformation palette. I use this a lot. So it's here, Polish by Groups. So pay attention to what's going to happen to the lines, Polish by Groups. So it gets softer and softer. So I'm going to do this a couple times. It gets to a point that, I mean, no matter how hard you do it or how much you do it, it's not going to do much. So I'm just going to do it a few times. I think that's probably enough. Do a quick check. Yep, so everything looks good. There are some of these polygroups that might need a bit more refinement, like see this one here, it's a bit too wobbly. But again, once we do the retopology of each one of these bits, we're going to use ZBrush. That should clean up the edges even more. We just need something to get started, like a good base. And this is all we're doing, we're just creating the base. And just want to check, yeah, that's a different one. I'm gonna give it a different color, just to make sure that everything, this one as well, I'm gonna give it a different color. Like, for example, this is a good example of something that needs quite a bit of refinement, but you'll see how we get there. So everything step by step. All right. Changing the hue really helps a lot. Yep, it's a really simple but useful technique. You can also right now I have the line off, but you can turn it on and off if you wanted to. This model have mapping. No, I'm not working with the UVs. How did Pablo change the hue? I missed it. Just go to preferences and under the draw palette. This is how you can control how things look in ZBrush. So the polyfill color opacity. It's just the opacity of the polygroup. By default it's 50, so it's a bit fainted. So sometimes I like to turn it on like that. There is this one which just gives you a black and white, like, you know. This one could be cool if you're working on a black and white, if you're just working with values, and you can take the polygroups and do a polypaint by polygroup and create just color out of this. And this just changes the saturation. So anyway, it's a cool thing, but it's not going to change the model or anything. It's just visually easier to see. Cool. So now that I have polygroups, let's go ahead and move on. So I'm going to go to the geometry, and on the geometry palette I have edge loops, or we have edge loops, or the edge loop tab, and this is the one that we're going to use to actually create geometry out of this. So remember, this is just a flat polygon, or like a flat, like single-sided mesh, so it has no thickness. So what I'll do with this is create, let's just do one panel loops and then we can fine tune it. But the default should give us something good to see what this is going to look like. So I want to click panel loops, and that's it. We now have geometry, thickness, every border. See, all of this has thickness. So let me just turn off polypaint. Polyframe. Right, so that is pretty much it. We can go ahead and maybe inflate everything a little bit, polish. Just give it a second. Actually, let's undo that. We can polish first. Polish by features. So you'll see we have this gap, and if we go ahead and bring in the move topological brush, I can just take this, and it has their individual pieces basically, which is what I want, right? So I'm gonna undo all this because I want to play with these edge loop settings a little bit more to get something better than this, because this looks a bit too smooth for my taste. So I'm gonna undo everything up to this point where I have the polygroups, and I'm gonna show you. I'm just gonna do a quick rundown of what this is, so that we can move a little bit faster again, because we're stuck in the mask. So the thickness will determine how thick each piece is going to be. So I think let's go for 0.02, which is double of what we just did. Hang on, 0.02. There we go. This polish slider determines how much polish is applied. So if we leave this to 0, let's do another panel loops, you'll see it's going to be super sharp, and there's some weird things happening here. So we have to take a look at that. So let's just undo that, increase the polish quite a bit, do another panel loops. So you'll see as it creates this, and I don't know why this is happening here. I think there might be, let's undo that. Let's change the thickness back to 1 and try that again. Okay, so we might have to, again, this is something that we're gonna fix once we do the series measure, but I just wanted to show you that these two are quite important to determine the look of it. So again, if you don't do any polishing, this is gonna be very hard, the borders. So let's just leave that as maybe 10. That's the default is 5, but let's just leave it at 10. Then the other important thing is this beveling. The loops. This is the amount of edge loops that ZBrush will add around each polygroup. So if I set this to 5, then let's do another panel loops. They're basically 5 poly loops. So in this border, there are like 5. I think it's 5. Yeah, 5 loops or edge loops. So you can remove that. So let's go ahead and undo that. I'm going to set it to 1. So you'll see it has less of that beveling effect because there's no loops in between. So this is closer to what I want. I want to have a little bit of gap. See everything together. of the mask behind it. So let me undo that again. And the other thing that you could play around with is the bevel and the elevation. So right now, the elevation, what it's doing is, it's quite simple really. So elevation, what it does is ZBrush analyzes the surface. So let's say that this line is the surface of this mask, and it's taking that as a base point. So it's taking the thickness and going, all right, we need to push, we need to create thickness from this point onwards, like so. So then the thickness is going to be like that, right? So this is from the side. If you set this to -100, it's just going to be the opposite, right? It's going to be from this point inwards. So it's going to create a thickness this way. And if you leave it at 0, it's just going to be right in the middle. That's going to be the thickness at 0. So hopefully that makes sense. So what I'll do is take the elevation to not 0, because I do want to have a bit of, you know what, let's leave it at 100, because we're going to push things manually anyway. And everything else seems to be fine. The beveling effect is, let's say if you have 5 loops or whatever it was, 5 loops here, and let's do another panel loops really quickly. So that beveling, this slider is what's creating this type of bevel, and this beveling profile is what is creating the exact same shape of that bevel, if that makes any sense. Basically, yeah, basically this bevel and this bevel profile are determining the shape of this beveling or the border. So if you look at this border from a side on, it will look kind of like this, right? And this shape is given by the profile, and how much of this is given by the bevel. So if you reduce the bevel, it's just not going to be any bevel. So it's just basically overriding this profile. So let's just do that. Undo. Change bevel to 0, and loops to 1. Panel loop. Now you see there is no beveling at all, but we actually have polygroups. Sorry, different pieces. So you can hold Shift and start smoothing, and you see everything is separated, which is kind of interesting effect, right? Let's undo that one more time, and this is gonna be the final time that we do this properly. So I'm gonna do a little bit of beveling. I think it was 50. Was it? I don't remember what I think it was 50. And let's go ahead and do panel loops. Maybe I want less gap. So let's just add 3 polyloops. All right, so that seems to be okay. Another thing I want to do with the beveling is I'm going to change, see the profile, this is what I meant. We can reset this and just make it softer if you wanted to. So you can do something like that. The curve now is going to be very soft. But because we don't have enough polyloops, it's not going to be easy for ZBrush to determine this. So what I'll do to make it sharper, just take this point, take it out and bring it back in, and then do another one. I'm just going to do the same type of profile that we had before, just going to be, these points are going to be closer to the edge. Brilliant. All right. I think that's it. We just leave it like that. Let's do a quick save. See if you guys have any questions about this process, which it's taking a while, but yeah. It's preference. I have a question about texture. If you have mapping on a model, just paint on the model to paint the texture. Yeah, that's pretty much. You can paint the model. You can paint the texture without having maps or UV maps. Sorry. Just paint it with a high resolution with a lot of subdivisions. So you're essentially painting the vertex color like poly painting, and then you can convert any poly paint to a texture, and you can project images, and you don't have to have UVs to create a really detailed texture in ZBrush. That is what I'm trying to say. Well, don't forget to quick save. Just did what you did in ZBrush Crash. All right, yeah. So quick save. Thanks for that. By the way, I know that there were like some like little bugs with with the latest update of ZBrush 2019.1, but there is a new one, 2019.1.2, and that fixes. I haven't had any other problem since I updated that. You just need to go to the updater, there's like updater.exe in the ZBrush folder, and you will just run it, and it will update, and that will fix probably those bugs. This technique you're using is amazing. Cut off a lot of time of modeling. Yeah, this is really cool. But at this point, this is just like, again, a sketch. We haven't actually get started with the kind of like the clean part. So we're gonna clean that first, and then we're gonna sculpt or move things apart. So let's do that really quick, because it's been we spent a bit of time on this mask a lot at this stream and the past one. Cool. So now that we have this, one thing that we can do is do a series measure, and we're gonna remesh every single piece, and we're gonna simplify the geometry quite a bit, but we're also gonna keep the polygroup. So we're gonna keep some sharp areas here. So this is gonna take maybe longer than, I mean, it's a complex set of objects, and ZBrush is gonna try to remesh it. So let's, we already did a quick save, so that's good. I'm gonna go to the series measure. There we go, and I'm gonna make sure that I have the half selected. I'm gonna use the series measure point 3.0. So let's leave legacy off. Another thing is probably adapt is not gonna be as important in this case, because adapt is really to change the size of the polygons depending on the details. So if you have an area that is quite flat like this, the polygons, if you leave adapt on, the polygons should be like larger or proportionally larger compared to areas with details, but in this case it's not useful, and the adapt density is gonna make it slower. Other thing we can do is keep, we can do two things. We can keep groups because we have a lot of different groups even in the borders, or we can just ask ZBrush to try to detect the edges, and that's just gonna keep some sharp edges all around. So let's try these two as it is. Another thing is we already did the smooth grouping, so this slider is not gonna do much, so we can just leave it at 0, and that also hopefully will keep things, moving faster. What the smooth groups does is essentially when it's doing the series meshing, is applying the smooth by groups, or similar process to the smooth by groups that we already did. So with these settings as such, let's just go and click series mesh and hope for the best. I'm going to turn on the line so that we can see the result. Series measure, and it's just going to take a few minutes. Well, not really. It's actually really fast. It's a complex object. There we go. So now we have cleaner topology, at least topology that is conforming to each one of these pieces. So that is actually pretty good. There's some additional polygroups, which is annoying, but that's fine. This first pass is cool. So what I'd like to do now, let me just double check that they're not too bad. Let's undo that. Yeah. So that didn't work as I was expecting. So I'm just going to increase the smooth back to 1. See what that gives us. Leaving both of these switches on. Let's just try that out, because I want to get something cleaner. Okay, so this is still trying to maintain these polygroups for some reason, but that's fine. The next thing that I want to try is I'm going to polygroup every single piece on its own. So in other words, every single piece is going to have its own polygroup. So we don't need to keep the groups anymore, and the detect edges, we can remove it, and we're gonna get a smoother surface to what we have right here. So let's go ahead, and for you guys should be under the polygrouping or polygroups subtab, and I'm just gonna click auto group, and ZBrush is gonna assign a polygroup to anything that is not connected by the topology. So that's pretty good. That's exactly what I wanted. And now we can run another series measure. Make sure that it's half so we can keep reducing the amount of polygons. So let's go for series measure. In theory, now that we have a cleaner version, it should be faster. So every time that you reduce the amount of topology, it should be faster. Let's do another one. And yet another one. All right, so we keep reducing this. So we have some nice set of polygons here, and we're getting closer to what I wanted, which are like creating these, pieces of geometry. I'm just thinking, if at this point, if you wanted to keep like reducing the poly count, you can. What I like to do now is refine some of these shapes and then run the series measure again, because this is not working for me. So I can go ahead and use the smooth brushes and just smooth areas like so. So the next time that I run the series measure process, series is going to try to clean these areas a little bit more. And I'm trying to keep the smoothing very subtle, just because remember, we have thickness. So if you use the smooth brush too much, you actually kind of like overriding that thickness that we created. This is what I was going for, so I'm not too fast. I'm happy with this result. I'm just cleaning up some lines to make them a bit more straight. That's all I'm doing here. And I have the move topological brush, so I can just push and move these points quite easily. Alright, so this is kind of like part of the process, just fine-tuning the shapes. So we'll look at this one here in the middle. Alright, so I think that's looking a little bit better. Let's go ahead and do another series measure. Alright, I have no idea why this happened, but let's go ahead and go to the polygroups, or the auto group, sorry, and now we have a polygroup for each one of these parts, which is what I wanted. So the next thing is to start pushing and moving things, and maybe we can delete some of the different pieces that we have here. Again, I want to make this to make it look so that it's very rough, like the character himself put it all together. So I wanna, and he's not very good, so I wanna do that type of thing. So before I get started with the pushing and moving things around, what I like to do is inflate everything, and I want a sharper set of polygons. So I'm going to inflate things, maybe subdivide once, so we have more resolution. Let's go ahead and do that. So we just have a tiny bit more resolution, and I'm just gonna have a look at this border here, so that it's easy to see the border. And let's go ahead and inflate things a bit so that they're closer together. And I'm gonna exaggerate it so that things are kind of like touching in the borders. But because we're gonna subdivide it a bit more and also use a clay polish to sharpen everything, then those two processes are gonna ideally will shrink everything, but at the same time as polishing. So I'm gonna subdivide this once more. So now we have 3 subdivision levels, 300,000, almost 400,000 polygons, and let's go ahead and do a clay polish. So clay polish should give us a sharper look. I'm gonna clear the mask because that's something important. If you use the clay polish brush, clay polish process, which for you guys should be here on the geometry subpalette clay polish. Once you do this, ZBrush actually creates, and you cannot see it very well, but it creates a mask around the edges. So if you do that again, it's kind of like doing the same process, but it's keeping some edges. So just be careful. Just clear the mask and run that clay polish again. So it's just sharpening things a bit. You'll see just polishing everything and get us to a good point with this guy. All right. So right now we have a bunch of different polygroups. The only thing is that if you want to move things symmetrically, and you use the move topological brush, because we have different polygroups, you won't be able to move them together because they're different polygroups, and this brush respects the polygroup. So in other words, let me just show you. If I just want to move these two together and I use this brush, it is working. I don't think it should, but it is, so great. All right, so yeah, what I'll do before I start moving things around is I'm gonna go ahead and get out of solo mode, right? And I'm gonna hold shift and click on this view icon or eye icon, and that is kind of like isolating, similar to solo mode. The difference is that you can turn on other subtools, right? And you should be able to see both. So now I have the two masks, the original one, right? That has all the, let's just increase this a little bit, has all these details of the wood carving, and I have this one. So as I told you in the previous lesson, all the work that we did in this is kind of like being covered by this, but it doesn't matter, because now we're gonna go ahead and delete some parts and make this look a little bit more interesting and less manufactured. All right, so I'm gonna start by deleting or removing some areas in this set of pieces, right? So I'm gonna hold Control and Shift. I'm gonna select these two, invert. So these ones are gone. I don't want those. Maybe one here at the top, maybe one here as well, and maybe another one here. I'm just trying to remove certain bits, that maybe the smaller ones, like this one here. This one is fine. Again, just playing with design and see what works. These two here, I think they work. We just leave them there. Let's see. Right. So I think that one works. That kind of helps with the expression. These two bits, they look kind of like the eyebrows of this mask. So that helps with expression as well. Cool. So now that I hidden these ones, by the way, let's just do it again. So duplicate this whole thing, put it into the originals just in case, because I'm gonna delete geometry. Now this is something that I found out just as I was playing around with ZBrush, and I don't know if it is one of the updates of the latest version, but it's quite useful. For example, right now that I have some pieces hidden, so if I invert my selection, oops, hang on, there we go. If I invert my selection, you'll see these are the pieces that I hid. If I want to delete those, I can simply go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and if I click Delete Hidden, because I have subdivision levels, it shouldn't let me do it. So beforehand, and this is what I found out. So before that, I had to go to Free Subdivision Level, Delete, and then Unfree Subdivision Level. But I think that's something that's been updated. So even if I have subdivision level now, I can just click Delete Hidden. No. So I don't know what I did then. Okay, so let's go ahead and free subdivision level. Come on. I'm gonna do it again. So I'm gonna, you know what? Sorry about that. I'm gonna hold Control W to assign a polygroup there. Invert selection, assign polygroup. So now I have these two polygroups. Now let's do it again. I'm going to go to the lowest subdivision level. Let's see if I can. No, sorry. Start over again. So I have these two polygroups. Forget about what I said about what I found out. I don't know how I found it out. Found that out. Maybe it wasn't for this. Anyway, so I have two set of polygroups. I want to get rid of these ones, but I have subdivision level, right? So one thing we can do is freeze subdivision level at this point before we hide anything, right? And ZBrush is gonna freeze that amount of subdivision levels and send us back to the original subdivision level, to level 1. So now I can hold Control and Shift and select this invert, and that's the reason I gave this to Polygroup, so I don't have to manually select them again, just to save some time. And now I can go to Delete Hidden, and now we don't have, if I hold Control and Shift, there's no hidden geometry. And now if we want to recover those details from the third subdivision level, although we don't have any details, we just click on this free subdivision level, and ZBrush is going to send us back to the third level. After ZBrush finishes this process, it's going to create a mask, so make sure that you control. And now we have this piece the way that we want it to. Cool. So the other thing I want to do is go to Polygroups and assign an auto group, just so we can play around with this individually. And that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and maybe reduce the subdivision level. And I'm going to make sure that with this move brush, with the move topological, we're going to enable AccuCurve. And that's going to give us a more pointy type of look. Maybe increase the subdivision, just because we can do this type of more like sharper lines. And all I'm doing really here is just sharpening some of the details, like the corners, so that they don't look as rounded. So I would say this process is part of the sculpting. And you can totally sculpt in this if you want. Alright, so I'm going to reduce it back again to this first subdivision level. And I'm going to hold Control and Shift and select this area by itself. I'm going to hold Control and click in the canvas, and now bring everything back. So now this is the mask area. I'm going to invert that masking, Control click in the canvas, and now I can work on this on its own thing. So one thing I want to do is inflate it. So it's going to be larger than the rest, kind of. So and thicker. And now I can go to the high subdivision level, and I'm going to hide everything. And I'm going to go into solo mode, and I'm going to bring in the edge polish. Or you know what, the trim dynamic might work better, just to make it more irregular. And this is a great brush. So what I'll do is just polish these edges. So this is why the trim dynamic, I think, will work better in this case, because it makes like chips and cuts on the surface that are a little bit more irregular. And like I said, I want to keep this kind of like, you know, more organic than a hard surface thing. So like a piece of wood. It's kind of like the process that we did with the surface noise last trim, but a bit more manual. It's creating those that wood pattern. Alright, I'm gonna get rid of or turn off symmetry, and I'm just gonna do a bit more of this so that it doesn't look symmetrical. Alright, so get out of solo mode. Oh, sorry. Yeah, solo mode. Bring back everything. So that looks alright. I just need to push things a little bit more. So let's just do it a bit strong, like with a stronger effect or a stronger pressure. Putting more pressure, really. And I just want to try to create a bit like a larger gap between this piece and the rest. And how are we with time? I think we're pretty good. I'll have a look at the chat in just a second. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in there. And maybe we can go with the edge polish, and that's just gonna respect the borders a little bit more. And that's just a quick polish to refine some of these edges. Cool. Let's bring back everything solo, and I'm gonna do a quick save. And you can also go back to the lowest subdivision level and bring in your move topological brush. And actually, for this one, we can enable symmetry and just push this thing. Refine the placement of this a bit more manually. So again, because this is kind of like the nose of the mask, I'm just gonna make it so that it's more like a nose, really. As in, from the profile, you can definitely see that this is higher. Alright, so I think that looks good. Let's just do another quick pass with the edge polish without symmetry, just to clean those movements of the brush that we just did. Cool. So I'm gonna clear the mask. So that's looking pretty decent. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with this one. I'm probably not gonna go through all of those details like I just did, because I would like to do them manually, but it's just gonna take a while and it's just a repetitive action. So we can just do this one, leave it there, and move on to the next technique, and then I'll do that afterwards. So I'm gonna mask this, bring everything on mask, or not on mask, invert the mask, and I'm gonna do a similar process. So just inflate this one, not to the same level, and this is something that I could do for each one of these pieces and have them at different heights, and that's just gonna create a lot of contrast and make it definitely more interesting. Maybe a little bit more. Okay. We can even bring in the gizmo at this point and then just push this back a bit manually so that it covers that border of the other mask, and it helps us with this gap. Perfect. Alright, so now we can go with the symmetry on, and I'm gonna bring in the trim dynamic. Again, this is the same process as we just did with the nose of the mask. Kind of like manually chipping away some bits. Let's go into solo mode as well and hide the rest. And you could use the same technique we used last stream as well for this one, if you'd like to. Again, I just want to show you different things that you can try and see what works for you. Let's go ahead and refine these bits here with the edge polish. I think this looks cool. Alright, and maybe just a bit more just to flatten this area. Alright, so let's get out of solo mode, bring back everything, clear my mask. So you'll see the process started to look a little bit more interesting. Like I said, I'm gonna do the same thing that I just showed you with the nose and this outer area for every single piece in here. But again, this is gonna be quite repetitive, so I'm not gonna do it. And I'm also going to change the elevation of it. So one thing just to show you, with the move tool in lowest subdivision level, I can take, for example, this one, turn off symmetry, and just push this one here like so, inflated, and it's gonna have a different elevation, this bit than this bit. So that's something that I will do later, just because it's exactly the same thing as I show you, and it's a repetitive action. So we can just move on and work on something else. I might need to actually remove some other bits and pieces, just because maybe I want to see more of details from the mask underneath, but we'll start with this as it is. Alright, so let's move on. Let's do a quick save. Let me just check the chat. Héctor Rosario, tienen que transmitir en español también. There are some people that do ZBrush live in Spanish, and they're awesome. So Oscar Trejo and Jose Rosales, they're fantastic, and they do Spanish one. I might, if I have the time, I might do that as well. Like I might do a Spanish one. So we'll see. Khalil is asking why you didn't use HD geometry on the mask you did a week ago. Because no need to. HD geometry is just to really get into the super high, high frequency details, really. But at the moment, I don't think I need to. If I wanted to do more of those details, I can just definitely do it. But depending on the project, I don't think we need it at this point. We have a fair bit of resolution still to go with the other mask. So this mask is at a 500 or like 1 million, 2 million. So we can subdivide it again. No need to use HD geometry just now. Nick is here. Can you ever truly die sad? What? I don't know. That's not related. What? I'm confused. All right, I think that doesn't have anything to do with ZBrush. I was trying to relate it to what I'm doing, but it's not. Also, your art, it looks sick. Thank you so much. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I'm gonna show you the fiber mesh thing. So let's do that first. We have plenty of time. Cool. So let me just think. Let's go ahead and turn everything back on. We can go to all low just to keep everything easy to move around. So that's looking kind of like what I was planning to do, but now we can do a bit of fiber mesh to fill in these areas and create kind of like the beard of the mask. So it's gonna be a stylized fiber mesh. It's not like a hyper realistic hair or anything. Just to show you that you can also do that with fiber mesh. I'm just thinking what would be the best way to approach it, and I think we can do is let me think. You know what? I'm just gonna show you a different technique again. So I'm gonna select the body. I'm gonna hide the two masks or the two pieces of the mask, and over this body, what I'll do is I'm gonna select, and actually I'm gonna go into the highest subdivision level, go into solo mode, and I'm going to create some geometry really quickly. And from that geometry is the base that we're gonna use to create the fibers. So this one is really cool, and it's called the Topology brush, this one right here. And it's really cool because it allows us to just paint over a mesh, like so. Hang on. Let's do it in the lowest subdivision level then. Come on. You know what? Let's do it a bit simpler. I don't want to delete this, so I'm just gonna duplicate my mesh. So this is just a dummy file, and I'm going to maybe divide it one more time and delete lower. Let's try that again. Alright, so we have the first curve. Now let's go ahead and do another one, like so. And then we can just start crossing these like so, and that will create some polygons. Great, and that's it. Once you click somewhere outside, ZBrush is gonna look at this and it's gonna create a geometry. And the thickness of this geometry, I think, is determined by the size of your brush. So let's just click outside, and now we have this piece of geometry. So it's super simple. Let's go ahead, and now that we have this, remember this is just a copy. I'm going to hold Control W to assign a polygroup just in case. Now I can hold Control and Shift just to hide everything except this bit, and we can delete hidden. That's it. All right. So a very clean piece of geometry. let me just go back to a lighter version of Polygroups. So a very clean piece of geometry that we can use as a base to grow the fiber mesh. I mean, this doesn't have to be as, as perfect, but it works. Just want to make sure that this is one polygon. Yep, cool. I just want to do something before we move on. On the crease palette, I'm gonna uncrease all. So uncrease all, and then I'm gonna crease back again by polygroup, just to get rid of that one in the middle very quickly. Now, so if we divide this, it's just gonna keep those sharp edges. Not that I need them or anything, but you know what? Let's just remove them. So uncrease all. Great. So now we can go back with the move brush. Make sure that we have AccuCurve, symmetry on. Let's bring back our masks. And let's go ahead and move this and just put it in place. Basically, that's all we're going to do. I'm only concerned about this edge. Whatever goes inside the mask is not going to be clearly visible, so it doesn't really matter. And we have some thickness, so that's great. Cool, so this is kind of like another part of the mask where the fiber mesh is going to grow from. All right, so we have that there. One thing with fiber mesh is that it's better to actually stylize the fiber mesh once we have the pose of the character. So this is gonna be a very simple one. So I'm gonna show you how you can grow it from there, but then I'm gonna use a different one once I pose the character. So I think we have time today to do a quick pose and start blocking out the rest of the clothes, and anything that is like a repetitive sculpting action, I might do it after. I mean, off camera. But yeah, so that is kind of what I wanted for this. Very simple. Eva Pixels from Australia, side effects. Is there any way to make the mask brush stronger? As strong as press the pen and it remains weak? Yeah, just remove pressure. You can, if you go to the brush palette, here under the tablet pressure, you can use global, and that means it uses the same global settings for every brush. But if you hold, like for example, I'm pressing shift to access the shift brush, you can see how this changes as well. So you can do a specific tablet pressure for every brush. The same thing for control. So I'm holding control to access the pen brush. So all you have to do is go into the size, sorry, not the size, the intensity, and just change that. You can play around with this, probably the intensity as well of the RGB. Just get rid of the curvature here on the profiles, and that should make it very strong. Also, if you want a very sharp edge, you can also reduce the focal shift. So just reduce this to almost 0. Sorry, to minus 99 or something, and that will give you a very sharp brush. All right. So let me show you what I would do with the fiber mesh, and then we can pose the character. So quick save. Haven't done that. Let's get into solo mode. And now the idea with fiber mesh is very simple. If you have something that is very complex, the best approach would be to work on polygroups before you do the fiber mesh. Because once you grow the fibers, they will have the polygroup from the surface or the underlying piece of geometry that you use to grow them from. So in this case, it's rather simple. There's not much to do. We can just actually hold Control and Shift to isolate these. Hang on a second. Okay, so I just want to create a polygroup for this to show you what I mean. So again, because this one is a very simple one, we don't have to create polygroups. But if you want to create something more complex, I would start with polygroups. So let me just show you how that workflow would look like. So I'm going to show you the more complex one, but because if you want to do something simpler, you don't have to do it, but it's better to know the more complex one. So I'm going to select my Z brush, and I'm going to hover over any face, right click on it, and I'm going to click polygroup and a single polygon, right? So that's going to create a different polygroup for each brush, for each polygon that I touch. So I'm going to click, oops, I'm going to click this one, then this one, and hold Alt, click Alt, click Alt, click Alt, click Alt, click Alt, click Alt. And for these ones, I'm going to get rid of symmetry, just do one more. So this is a very simple way to do that. You can do any type of polygrouping. This is just a quick way to go about it. All right. So now that I have this line with polygroups, the rest doesn't really matter. What I can do is hold Control and Shift to isolate this bit, invert that selection, mask everything, and now we have just this set of different polygroups masked, and that's where we're gonna create the polygroup, the fiber mesh from, right? So let's get out of solo mode so we can have a better view, and let's go to fiber mesh and let's create some fibers. So fiber mesh is, I'm sure you know what this is, but it's a really powerful stuff within ZBrush. It's just a little bit, I don't know, I think some people find it a little bit complex, or I don't know if it's scared is the word, but it's such a simple thing that once you get the hang of it, it's like any other tool in ZBrush. Just need to get the basics right. Cool. All right. So what I'll do is go to modifiers, and obviously we don't have any right now. And remember, we have this area masked, right? So we're gonna grow fibers only from the mask areas. Now the most important thing at this point is to make sure that whatever mesh you're using to grow the fibers from is not set to double, unless that's what you want. And that for you guys should be, I have it here in my UI, for you guys should be here on the display properties. And basically this is the one that allows you to see inside the model. So it's just displaying the two-sided polygons. So if you have this enabled, what ZBrush is going to do is going to create fibers from both sides of the normal. Let me just show you this quickly. So let's say that this is just a single polygon, right? A single square, single-sided. And let's say that this is the normal, right? So the normal is pointing outwards, right? Once you have this double enabled, when you create fiber mesh, ZBrush is gonna look at the base geometry or the surface, and it's gonna create the fibers like that, you know, pointing towards the normal, and also from this other side. Okay, so this is very important, because otherwise it will be really annoying. It's very important because you're gonna create essentially double the amount of fibers, and not only that, but because when you start like grooming them, you might also grab some of these ones inside the polygon. So let's say you start grooming the brushes, these ones like that, and then you might grab with the brush size these ones, and then it's going to start like pointing in. So it's going to create a mess. Unless you actually need that to be the case, just make sure that whatever mesh you use to create the fibers is set to, like, the double is set to off. So that's hugely significant for fiber mesh. Cool. So now that we have that there, let's click preview, and now we have a nice beard. Brilliant. So that's really what we want. We just need to tweak it. And again, I'm gonna do this step after when I pose the character, but it's gonna be exactly the same thing I'm gonna show you today. So once we pose the character, I'll do all this process, and we continue from there in next stream. But yeah, so let's go ahead and tweak the fibers. We can go into solo mode now, just to have a closer look at this. One thing that I missed is because the amount of geometry that we have, the mask is actually spreading out. So let me just turn this off. Going to this is something that I should have done beforehand. Yeah, so let's go ahead and subdivide this. Oops, clear the mask, subdivide this, and I think we can actually simplify this a little bit. So let me just go to Simulator, and I'm gonna hover over any edge, click Bevel, and I'm just gonna bevel this like so, and maybe another one here. And the only reason I'm doing this is because otherwise the mask itself is gonna fade and spread a bit, and ZBrush is gonna create fibers for that from that point. So it's gonna have a clean mask here. So I'm gonna do one more bevel here. And keep in mind that this geometry doesn't really matter. We might keep it, we might not, but it's not gonna make a huge difference in terms of topology or the mesh itself. It's gonna be hidden. We just need this to grow the fibers. We can actually just mask the body itself and create them from there, but you know, just to show you more techniques. Cool. So let's go ahead and hide everything. I'm gonna turn double just for now, so I can make sure I hide the right parts. I'm gonna mask this area, bring back everything, make sure double is off, and here we go again. Let's do it again. So preview. So you see now we don't have those weird ones that were like shooting from the edges. Great. So now we can start tweaking the fiber mesh. The fiber mesh are gonna, or the gravity of the fiber mesh, they're gonna grow based on the camera angle. So here we have gravity. So if I push this all the way to 1, you see the gravity obviously is pulling this down. But if let's say if I move the camera to there and click preview and do it again, you see now the fibers are still pointing downwards because that's how ZBrush interprets the gravity. But if you turn around, they're like pointing that way. So when you're growing the fibers and tweaking these things, just be aware of which angle you're doing it. This might be very powerful if you're actually doing bits and pieces of fiber mesh one at a time and you want them to shoot in different directions. But we don't want that right now. So let's go ahead and click on this base, set it to white, and the tip as well to white. I just like to have a cleaner look without any color information. Just concentrate on the fibers itself, or the fibers themselves. The next thing is I'm gonna reduce this fiber count quite a bit. And remember, this is going to, or what I'm trying to do is something a bit more stylized. So let's go ahead and increase the length a bit. And I'm gonna increase the coverage. So the length is obviously how long they are. The coverage is how thick they are. So now we can create like thick planes like this. I don't want them to be as thick, but for now let's just leave it as 5,000. If you want this to be even larger or wider, if you want to create kind of like a set of hair cards, right, for game character or something like that, one thing you can do to increase that is going to the width profile, and you can just push this up. And now these ones are thicker, but I don't want to do that. So I want to keep it simple. And the other thing I want to do is actually have some, I'm just thinking, because this is going to be a stylized, we can go ahead and actually have some volume. Right now these are just planes. So if I get closer, you see this is just, single-sided set of fibers. And if I turn on polyframe, you won't see it until I convert them, because this is just a preview. Anyway, so let's go ahead and change this a bit. So the twist is how much they're actually twisting over on itself, like each one of these strands of polygons. So if I set this to 0, you'll have them a bit more straight, which is kind of like, it's kind of like a cool thing. I'm thinking of creating this. I'm going to increase the length. I'm going to create this kind of like a curly type of effect. So I'm going to decrease the number of fibers again. Don't need as many. You'll see that the length as well is kind of like uneven. You can also change this on the next to the length. You can change the the randomness or the variation to 0, and that will try to make them more consistent. But I kind of like, the messiness of this as well. What else? We can change the profile, and the profile is what I was trying to say. This is currently a single-sided polygon, so the profile we can increase that to, let's say, 5. Maybe 5 is too much, but it doesn't matter. So 5 is going to give us, thicker version of these polygons, which is kind of like how I would stylize this. And now that we have thickness, then we probably need less, actually. So less of this. Let's just set it to 2. And this number is in the thousands. So if we set this to 2, it's going to be 2,000, right? So 2,000 fibers here. Then we have the segments, and the segments are, so profile is, you go from a flat set of polygons to a rounded type of mesh, right? That's profile. Segments is how many of these actual segments or cuts you're going to have. So at the moment we have 3. That means we have, let's take this one as an example. We have this point, this is the tip, this is the root, and then we have 2 cuts, and that creates, one. This is a horrible thing. Right, so here's the root, here's the tip, and we have 1, 2, and 3, and that's determined by the segments. So if you increase the segments, that's going to do it for all of them. So you're going to end up with a lot of geometry, but having more segments allows you to have more control over the shape of it, right? So I'm going to increase this to 6. It's not too bad. Let's go it for 8. Right, so now you have a lot of different segments, and that allows you to have more control over the shape, right? So with that in mind, let's go ahead and tweak the shape, because now it looks weird. So we can go to the scale root and scale tip. So the scale tip, you can play around with this and just change this immediately, but I'm going to leave it as -1, so it's pointy. And the scale root, I'm going to leave it as it is. But now we can go to the width profile, right? And in ZBrush, anything that you'll see as a curve like this, or a profile, anything that is on the left side is going to be the root or whatever it is, or the base, and anything that's on the right side is going to be the tip or the top part, or the right hand side, doesn't matter. So in this case, I want the base, which is on the left, to be thicker, you'll see it, and the one here at the tip to be thinner. So that's a really ugly version of it, but it just demonstrates what this profile is doing. So let's go ahead and tweak that. I'm going to set the size of the base to be not as thick, and then I'm going to push the tips as well. Okay, so if we add a new point in here, we're actually going to change the thickness along the way. So if I click another one here, you'll see it's getting thicker, almost closer to the tip. So this is how you can create a whole bunch of different effects just by playing with the curves. It's really, really powerful. One thing you can do if this is too thin for your taste, you can set the scale of the tip back to 0, or to 1. To 1 is just the default one. You'll see it's more obvious what we have here. I think it was fine as it is. All right, so that is kind of like you would go about it. I don't want them to be as heavy. These are like hair, really, so it's not going to be as heavy. Stylized hair, but it's not going to be as heavy. We can probably take the coverage, the overall coverage, and reduce that. So they're going to be a bit thinner, and something like that. And then we can increase this to maybe 3,000, maybe 4,000. All right, so there's going to be quite a bit of geometry here. And like I said, I don't want them to be as heavy. So what we can do is take the gravity and ask ZBrush not to affect these fibers with as much gravity. So we can turn this to 0, and that they will just shoot like this. So let's just play around with the geometry a bit. something like that. And if we want to make them a little bit more messy, which I want in this case, I don't want them to be like as perfect. So these ones won't have as much grooming because I wanna get the effect right from the settings. Um, yeah, so I wanna get the effect right before we press save, or before we actually create them. So let's go ahead and let me think what would be the next step to make it easier. Because I generally play with these because I kind of like know where I'm going for, but I'm trying to show you kind of like a step-by-step process so that you can follow it. I reckon at this point what you can do is play with the revolve and the twist again. So revolve is just gonna make the kind of like curly effect. So let's go ahead and let's play with that. So the revolve radius is just gonna give you this type of effect, which is pretty cool. If you don't see this effect as obvious, remember that it's actually taking the tube of the geometry and is twisting it. So if you don't have enough segments, you won't be able to see it. So if I change this to 1, you won't see any revolve happening. Right? So the more segments that you have, the more obvious this effect is going to be, and the sharper the tubes are going to look like. I'm going to set the segments back to what I had. I think it was 8. I think 8 is a good compromise. You can actually reduce the number of polygons, since this is kind of like a stylized thing, to the profile of being 3. So it's going to be like triangles, or like pyramids. So it's only going to have 3 sides. Nah, that doesn't work. Let's keep it at 4. Maybe 4 is just, again, good compromise. All right. Again, this revolve radius or rate, you can also tweak the curve itself. So if you don't want them to have the same, I don't know the word, curliness all around, you can just do something with this. So push the root to a value of 1. That's going to make it very curly. Or do the opposite. Just set it to 0. So the curliness is happening towards the end, which is kind of like what I want. Again, you can exaggerate to really see the effect. Something like that. Just play with the curve. So this is something that I generally, like a set of steps that I generally follow. I try to get as much as the look as I want from the settings before I groom anything. The grooming just happens to give direction and flow, but I try to get as many settings right from the beginning. So because as you see, it's just a matter of changing curves. It's really, really easy. Okay, so we get in there. Let's have a look at it with everything. So that's looking cool. One thing I want to do is probably make them a bit longer. Not everything. Just want to make it something like that, right? And another thing you can do is we're going to leave it as this length, and then later on we can use one of the grooming brushes, the groom lengthen, to push things down a little bit a little bit more here, just to make it longer. So that's going to be fun. And all right, so now that we tweak these, the other thing is if I want to make it more messy, which I want in this case, more like messy, this is just it's not like this guy spent some time grooming this mask beard or anything, so it's just gonna be messy. So we can take the gravity profile, and the gravity has, like I said, the gravity determines the direction of the fibers, where they're pointing. So right now we have only 0.3 of the gravity, so that helps us visualize these fibers as not being as heavy, they're not as influenced by the gravity as something else. So another thing we can do is change the variation. So if I push this, you'll see the effect straight away. So let's just remember 0.05 is the default. So I push this to 1, you'll see it just messes everything around. This is kind of like varying the direction of each single fiber. So you can play with this to 1 or 0. 0 is very, very straight. So it was in 0.05, so I'm gonna just add a bit more, 0.09, 0.07. That's a good one. That's actually not too bad. Let's just go 0.1. 0.1. No, that's too much. 0.08. Cool. That's it. That's the one that I like. And yeah, for the most part, everything looks pretty good. So you can see it's just a matter of playing around with these profiles. The twist is just gonna add a twist over itself. I might not want to do it. Let's have a look. I'm gonna try to show you something, just in case you find it useful. So pay attention to this specific strand of hair, right? So this, the revolve radius, the one that we just played around with, that one, that basically takes, hang on, right. So the revolve radius basically takes a set of polygons, right, or a strand of hair, and it's gonna go ahead and start from the base. Let's say that this is the curve, the other way around. No, yeah. So this is the root. So in this case, this one is gonna be straight, and this is the tip. So it's gonna take this and it's gonna tell ZBrush to try to take this like so, like just moving things around depending on this curve. So that's the revolve radius. The twist is different. So what the twist is going to do is what the name suggests. So it's going to take the same strand of hair or the strand of fibers, and it's actually going to twist from the root to the tip. So with not too much twist, what you end up with is something like this. Right? So it looks, it could still be straight just with twist. So if you combine twist and revolve radius, what you end up is with a very complex polygon or set of polygons that is revolving but is also twisting over itself. So this is a multiplication. So these two together, twist and revolve, create a very complex thing. Hopefully that makes sense. Cool. So with twist, let's go ahead and push that a little bit. So that the twist actually helps quite a bit to create. Let me just do it again. I'm gonna select a more shinier, maybe this one, basic material. So now the material is a bit shinier. So what we can do is see a bit more of that kind of like anisotropic look of the fibers. Where is it? I lost it. Here we go. Twist. So as I start twisting this thing, maybe from a distance it will be better. You'll see a little bit more of that anisotropic effect of the fibers of the mesh. So I'm gonna set it to, I think the default is 18, but I might want a little bit more than that. Let's set it to 35. Alright, so that's a good compromise. And you also have the twist variation, so you can variate, not adding all the twists to everything uniformly. You can just add more twists randomly to different parts. But I think I'm happy with this. I think it looks quite good. So now let's go ahead and save this. We can save the preset. So I'm gonna save it. 1 second. I'm gonna have a look at the chat. So I'm gonna call these fibers. Cool. So I save this as a preset, and now we can go ahead and click accept. Actually, let's get out of solo mode. Click accept, and ZBrush is gonna ask us if we wanna set a preview because there's quite a bit of fibers. I'm gonna click yes, just so that it's easy. Cool. And that's it. Now we have a new subtool. Let's go to the original base mesh, and I'm gonna clear that mask. I don't need it anymore. And I'm having the fibers now, like so. And that is working quite nice. So now we can go ahead and do some grooming, And the reason, by the way, the reason I save this preset is, like I said, I'm not gonna. So this is not the final set of fibers. I'm gonna pose the character, and once once the character is posed, I can again select an area that I want to grow the fibers from, load my preset of these specific settings, and I can grow the fibers in the right pose. So that is the workflow. That's what I would do. I'll probably play around with the settings at this stage, but I will only grow the fibers when I can groom them, basically. Because if I groom things like, let's say, yeah, if I start grooming things and create a nice set of, direction for this mesh, when I pose the character, then there might be some intersection, and you know, the shoulder might push things around the chin, and I will have to do it anyway. So it's better to do it straight from the pose, I think. All right, let me just check the chat, and I'm gonna take a quick break just to bring some water. We have about 15 minutes left. Is it recommended to sculpt a figure in a T-pose, and once the figure is completed, then pose the model, or do you begin with the model the character is that pose from the beginning? It depends on the project. For this character, I would do the pose. So it's better to have a T-pose if you want to work with symmetry. If you want to like literally sculpt asymmetrically, then you don't need to. Working with symmetry is faster. Working with asymmetry creates a more lively and I think realistic and dynamic sculpture, really, because you have to. It's impossible to make it exactly the same on both sides, and that is kind of like straight away makes it more realistic and more interesting. But it depends. It depends on the project. It's only scary to handle. I don't like it. WC Khalil, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Cool. So let's just leave it there for a second. I'm gonna grab some water, and I'll be back in just 2 seconds, and we'll finish this up right now. So be back in 2 seconds. All right, so we're back, and we have about 10 minutes left, but I think Oscar is next, and he's starting way later. So we can go over a few more minutes, I think. Hey, Moram. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you're enjoying the sessions. I do certainly enjoy this part of the week. It's very chill, and we get to do stuff, so it's a win-win. All right. So the other thing I wanted to do in this stream to hopefully get it ready, I want to just show you a quick technique or something that I mentioned earlier about the polygroups for the fibers, and then just do a quick pose of the character. Just because the pose of this character is going to be very easy. and shouldn't take too long. So I want to get that done so that the next stream we can wrap it up. Cool. So what I was going to show you is if I go to the fibers and let's get closer. I just want to check. Yeah, so it's getting close. So if I turn on polyframe with the fiber mesh selected, you'll see that we have polygroups for each one of those polygons that we grew the fibers from. So this is super useful because we can now take something like, for example, let's try the hair toss. So this is gonna break a little bit the illusion of the curliness, but doesn't matter. And we can go ahead right now. This is the effect of this brush. I can just take anything and do this type of stuff, which is not ideal. This is not what I want. So instead, what I'll do is I'll go to the brush palette, and in the brush palette there is actually a dedicated sub palette for fiber mesh. So it's here, fiber mesh, right? And also I'm going to expand this auto masking sub palette. So the first thing I want to do is increase this mask by polygroups to 100. So now whichever polygroup I touch first is the only one that is going to be affected. So if I only want to change this one right here, I'm going to click. So you see I'm not affecting any other fibers, just this one. So I can do these type of things just in one polygroup and break those two apart if I wanted to. And that is all because you can do that with any brush. I just increase this mask by polygroups. So the only thing to remember is that this mask by polygroups is a global setting. So I can change to any other brush and it will still be 100. So just remember that you have it on, because sometimes it's just going to give you a very frustrating effect if you don't remember that you have it on, because it's not all the brushes are going to behave the way that you expected. So this is the first thing. The second thing is you can play around with all these settings. I'm not going to get into it because that might take a bit of the time that we have for the posing, but probably the most important one is this front collision tolerance. You can reduce that, and the front collision tolerance is how much bending of each one of these fibers is happening. This one is how to explain. It's not how to explain. It's just actually, I'll just do it quickly. Let's say that this is the surface, and this is one strand of hair, just pointing outwards, right? So if you start grooming and pushing things around, let's say this is the grooming, right? This front collision tolerance is set to 50. That is basically creating like a cap or a limit of how much you can actually bend the surface, the fiber in relation to the surface. So let's say 50 is up to here, right? So this is the amount of tolerance. This is the collision tolerance between, and when this collision refers to the collision between the actual fiber and the surface, right? So right now it's at 50. So no matter how hard you press, this thing is never going to go below, this 50%. So this is as flat as you can get it to the surface. So this is a really powerful one. So if you reduce this to, let's say, let's do it on this side. If you reduce this to 5 or something like that, then you can take these fibers and then just push them really, really close to the surface, because the tolerance is lower. Hopefully that makes sense. So if I take, it's not going to be very obvious here because, let's try to make it obvious actually. So it's an important concept that I'm sure you're going to find helpful. So I'm just going to turn just these two on, and I'm going to hold Control and Shift to isolate this. This is another reason why polygrouping is so powerful, so that I can isolate pieces of hair, right? So this one should give you a better idea of the collision tolerance. So right now it's at 50, and I can take this and push it like so. You'll see no matter how hard I press, these are not going to be very close to the surface. So here is the collision tolerance that I was talking about. So this collision is kind of like 50 is kind of like this. No matter how hard I press, I'm not gonna be able to make them closer to the surface in this case. Right? So let's go ahead and undo all that. Right? But this time I'm gonna change the collision, the front collision tolerance to 10. Let's go for 10. No, maybe less. 5. Actually, I'm gonna change these to the groom long hair, so that it's easier. Because this the hair toss also has the stiffness, which is actually I'm gonna show you. So with the stiffness, I can set that to 0, and they're not gonna try to maintain the stiffness of the polygons. So now I can get really close to the surface because I have the collision, the front collision distance to 5. Right? Let's undo that again. And all I did before was just reduce the stiffness. So the stiffness is just that ZBrush is gonna try to maintain the stiffness of these fibers. So if I leave this at 0 and push this, but I don't remember what it was. I think it was 50. Yep. So you'll see there's no stiffness in the fibers. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just playing around with these settings and figure out which one works for you or for what you're trying to do. So I like to set the collision distance maybe to something like 10, and I want to have a little bit of this stiffness, so let that to 20. And then we can go ahead and actually another really cool thing is that any grooming brush actually has you can tweak things of the brush itself that is not within the fiber mesh. So for example, if you go to modifiers, something that the damp standard brush uses is pinching at the same time that you draw the line, right? So that is within the modifiers of the brush. So right now, this is the effect of the hair toss brush. So I have a series of custom brushes. One of them is a bit more refined than what I'm showing you, but essentially you can push the modifier to 100. This is going to be very strong, and then it's going to toss the hair around, but it's also going to pinch it to create some clumps of hair, right? So that is just with this modifier and all the settings that we tweaked here. So with this in mind, we can just do something like this really quickly. Right, and stylize it quite a bit. And that is just tweaking some of the things in the brush and making sure that mask by Polygroups is enabled. Again, this is very rough because it's not going to be the final one. And in fact, another thing you can do is go to the fiber mesh. And this is probably the last tip I'm going to give you on that before we move on. Where are we? Fiber mesh. And here at the bottom of fiber mesh, you have the preview settings, and that's if you remember when we created the fibers, ZBrush asked us to preview the fibers in a simpler way, just with these little lines. So we turn off fast preview, then we can see the real result of the fibers. So a really cool thing you can do is let this fast preview on, but reduce the amount of fibers. So this is kind of like grooming individual or changing fewer strands of hair. So if you ever use something like XGen or Natrix or something like that, you have a small fewer strands of hair, really. Pardon me. And then you move one, and it's actually moving a bunch of them. Sorry, sort of. So I'm just gonna set this to 1, and then I can just manipulate small, like a fewer of these, just to make it easier and be able to control this a little bit more. And that also allows you to see where the clumps of hair are happening. which is pretty good. All right, so something like that, right? And then you can simply turn off fast preview and see how everything is looking. Now, if you want to go back to what you had with a little bit more of randomness, you can use another brush like, I forgot the name, 1 second. I think it's Turbulence. Yeah, here we go. So Groom Turbulence. That needs to be very, very subtle, but you can, with a larger brush, you can create a bit of that, randomness on the fibers, just to make it more realistic. At least in this case, that is quite messy. Cool. So that's one of the workflows that I would use for fiber mesh to create this type of messy beard that I want for the mask. Perfect. So let's go ahead and to wrap up today's session. So this is what we have so far. I think it's looking pretty good. Let's just compare it to the sketch. So we've done quite a few things in 3 sessions. So what I want to do now is we still haven't done these kind of like fur coat on top and this piece of clothes that I might just cut into a few pieces. These other, I don't know what these are. We'll figure out later. And the rest of the accessories. So what I want to do now before we wrap up and move on, I think I want to just do a quick pose to get. It's going to be a very simple pose, and then once we have the pose in the next stream, we can probably finish up with the rest of the accessories and the clothes, just to wrap it up. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Like I said, these fibers are not going to be the final ones, so I'm just going to delete them. That's it. Remember, I also have the settings saved, so I can just recreate them at any point. And we have the base mesh here. So for the pose, what I'll do is I'm just gonna go to my move brush. I'm gonna select these. See this? Yeah, and it's actually really easy. That's why I left it to the end. It's not gonna be very complex. So all we have to do, let's do a quick save. Let's go to plugin, or the C plugin. I have it here at the top. Just gonna get rid of that. So in the C plugin we have the transpose master, this one right here, and all we have to do is create a T-pose mesh, and ZBrush is gonna combine all the lowest subdivision level of all the tools into a single one. So now we have a single mesh, but we still have all the polygroups and everything like that. So all we have to do now is mask the areas that we want to move around and create a pose. So I'm going to start with the torso and the lower part area. So I'm going to click on this mask lasso, so it's going to be easier to mask. And symmetry, I'm going to start with symmetry. So I'm going to mask this area. Holding control and clicking the mask is just going to blur that mask, right? Bring in the gizmo, and I'm just going to rotate the character from this angle. Oops. Let me just undo that. I'm going to turn off symmetry. The symmetry was only to mask symmetrically, but not for the rest. Do the same thing here for the leg, and things are gonna break anyway. So don't worry too much about it. Things are gonna break when you're doing posing, and that's part of the process. You just need to, don't be too concerned about it. We need to just get the pose right, get whatever you wanna showcase with the character, and then just take the time and refine the pose. Plus, in this case, this character, you won't see much of it anyway, actually. Because I'm trying to have everything covered by the claws. Alright, so this is going to be the arm that has this stick. I'm going to hold Control and Shift and click on that to isolate it so that I don't mask that. So you see, this is very simple. It's just masking the area that you want to move. Use the Gizmo 3D to rotate it in place, and that is pretty much it. Like I said, there are some areas that are gonna break, and just need to be conscious about it. That there's not a lot of a way around it. But again, that's part of the process, and you will fix them. It's easy to fix anyway. So I'm just holding Alt to reposition the gizmo. So without affecting the model, holding Alt. Yeah, you can just repositioning the gizmo and rotate it. And once it's in place, we can just move things around. There we go. This one actually we can blur this mask quite a bit so that we have a nice rotation of the arm. Alright, so something like that I think is kind of like what I'm going for. We can tweak this a bit more. This guy has an awkward hand anyway, so I'm not gonna deform this too much. And again, things are gonna break, so don't worry too much about breaking stuff in this posing, because it is gonna happen, and unless you do a proper rigging and skin and white painting in a different software, it's gonna be very hard to get a perfect deformation. But again, once you have the pose, then that's why I do it at this point before I do any more complex stuff. Cool. So clearly here in the arm, we can just actually go to smooth brush, really softly press here to smooth things out a bit. We'll do that after. Let's go ahead. Actually, this looks a bit awful. Alright, so something like that. I think that looks alright. Let's leave the hand there. And this arm is just going to be kind of like down, really. So something like that. Alright, and let's just bend that a little bit so it looks a bit more natural. And the hand a bit. Let's clear the mask. I'm just gonna mask from the elbow to the wrist, and then just like in the middle, and then just blur that mask, invert that, and we can just do a quick rotation here. Right, so that is kind of what I'm going for. Let's bring up this guy, mask that out, center pivot. What I want to do here is hold the Alt key and just center this pivot around the top area so that it's easier to manipulate. Just put that one in there. We can actually squish this in. I mean, you can move the arm, but and we'll tweak this later with the move brush. This is kind of like the blocking of the shape of the pose, and then we do some refinements. Okay, so I think that is getting there. Let's go ahead and work on the face, on the head actually. I'm gonna hold Control. We can drag. Maybe add a little bit more here on the neck. Perfect. Make sure everything is masked. Invert that selection. Bring in the gizmo. Center the gizmo. Reset the rotation, and I'm gonna try to position this closer to the neck, and we can rotate as well. Alright, so I want this guy to be kind of like looking this way. I'm just trying to think about the silhouette so that you can read it a bit better. Maybe push it forward a bit. So something like that. I think I'm happy with this. I might just need to tweak this stick. It's because if I rotate it, if I take the shot of this character from this angle, you won't be able to read this much. So this part of the posing process is also thinking about the silhouette and how the character is being portrayed. So now we can take this whole thing. And another thing that you can do is go to the masking palette, and we can grow the mask from this point so that we don't mess around with this area that it looks a little bit more complex to mask. We can grow the mask and sharpen it. Grow and sharpen, grow and sharpen. And maybe grow, no, maybe let's leave it like that. Okay, and then I'm gonna reset the pivot to be closer to the arm, or to the shoulder really. And I'm gonna find that pose that I'm interested in. Also, at this point, I like to pose the character without perspective, but once I turn perspective, I can have a better read of this pose. So I can just push things around. Just try to make it feel more natural again, and create some empty space here, something so that the character looks or reads a little bit better. Alright, that's it. So just final tweak with that mask. Now that we are working without symmetry, we can actually take one of these horns, for example, and use the move brush with a larger brush, and then just do little tweaks just to make it more asymmetrical, so it's not perfect. And let's do some quick refinements, very quick refinements of this pose. So I'm gonna take this move brush, point that out, just to create that sharp line of the elbow. And this arm is kind of like contracted, so the bicep is a little bit more, should be in theory bigger, bulging out a little bit more than the other arm. So those are the type of refinements that I would do at this stage. Very subtle stuff. I'm making sure that the pose is working. And remember, this character is not going to, I mean, you won't see much of the body, so I didn't put too much time or effort on the anatomy of the body, just the proportions really, because the rest is just going to be covered by the the close. So just making sure that the distribution of polygons looks alright from every angle. And let's just do quick smoothing here to refine this area of the neck because it's stretching too much. Again, this is a pretty rough pose, but it's just showing what I need to show with this character. It's kind of like a curious guy, but I don't know, might be quite old. Don't know. Cool. So I think we'll leave it there, this pose. So let me show you how you go back to the previous one and then we do a save. Another thing you can do actually is if I hold shift, right, you can rotate the camera around and snap it to the different position. So if you want, you can actually take the entire mesh and then rotate it so that when you snap to an angle, it gives you a closer look to, or a closer shot to the final one. So with anything, I mean without anything mask, can reset the point, the pivot point, and hold shift. So I snap to this view. I'm just gonna rotate this around like so. So now, if I rotate around, I can just snap to these different views, and this is close to the final look of the character, right? So, all right, now let's go ahead and send this back, or this pose, to all the subdivision levels and everything. Because right now we're working in just a single subtool. So here in the transform master, all we have to do is just click on this T-pose to subtool, T-pose mesh to subtool, and that is going to take everything and send it to the other one, to the original one. But before we do that, I'm just going to click on this layer and click on this T-pose to subtool, and so it's going to do its thing. The layer, what the layer does is that it's going to create this pose into its own layer, and that's super powerful because we can keep working on T-pose. But once we want to finish and then we have all the details ready, we can go back to the pose that we have. So let's do a quick save here. And I'm going to show you what I mean in just a second. So what I mean is that, let's say this mask, I want to keep working on symmetry, right? So I can select the mask, right? And go into solo mode if I want to, just to make sure it is the right one. And if I go down here to layers, I have this, I have the pose mapped or within this layer, so I can just reduce that to 0, right? And now this mask is set to symmetric. So now I can keep working with symmetry, essentially. The only thing is that because I have this layer, if I want to keep working on symmetry, I have to basically create a new layer and keep working, and then anything that I do from this point onwards has to be within layers. But that's it. Once I finish with the rest, I just push this back to 1, and now we have the pose of the character ready. So now that we have this ready, we can go ahead and create the fiber mesh and the close and all that. So I'm gonna leave that one for the next stream. So hopefully today you'll learn a couple of things, so at least enjoy this process. So what I'll do again is, off camera, and before we get to the next session, I'm gonna create the fiber mesh that I showed you how to do anyway, and refine the mask a little bit, and reposition this, which is just move brush. And other than that, I'm gonna leave it pretty much like this. I'm just gonna do some minor refinements to finish up with this blocking, and in the next stream we're gonna work on the rest of the cool stuff. Hopefully they're gonna be at least cool to show. So we're gonna work on kind of like the close, which at this point I'm not sure what exactly are going to be. We can figure that out later, and then do the fur coat of this guy wearing it here with the fiber mesh. And I think I had some, I don't know what this is going to be, kind of like a very badly created scarf with things, and also the necklace or the collar or whatever this guy is wearing, and we can do some extra things if we have time. But at this point, I think we did a good progress, and the rest, I'm sure we can finish it in the next stream. If you want to have more tips about the clothes, I'll show you next stream actually, so don't worry about it. I'll give you some extra tips in the clothes when we do the clothes in the next stream. Alright, so I'm gonna leave it here. I'm gonna show you what we had, and again, this one should give you an idea of the process of working as a T-pose or in a T-pose, and then do a quick pose like we did with this guy. Alright, so I'm gonna leave it here, guys, and I'll see you in the next stream. Let me just check the chat actually. If you have any questions, I can do that really quickly. Had a question not necessarily relevant to this one, but how do you do eyelids in a way that can be animated? Yeah, so nowadays, like I haven't done this for a long time, as in I haven't done this animation ready for facial stuff. That's usually someone else deals with that. I do the concept sculpts. But back in the day when I was animating, I don't know, I'm not sure if this is still relevant. I would I would model two blend shapes with the eyes closed and without the eyes closed, just to see the deformation of it. So the model for the eyelids, I will just create a lot of geometry around the eyelids, and sculpt the character or the face with the eyes open, kind of like with the expression that you want, but making sure that in the red topology you have enough loops around the eye, so that when the animator or the rigger animates the character and rigs it, actually the rigger will have enough geometry to create kind of like the deformation and the curvature of the eyelids. So from a sculpting point of view, I would just make sure that I sculpt the expression that I want, or the kind of like the standard or default pose, and then when I do the retopology, I will have enough loops around so that you can animate it and rig it properly. Hopefully that answers your question. This is absolutely what I needed, Pablo, to know. Thanks. I'm glad that you find something of value here. Is the fiber brush paintable as a 3D model? You mean the fiber mesh? Or the fiber brush? If you mean the fiber mesh, yes, you can just, it's just, fiber mesh is just optimized polygons for deformation as grooming, but it's normal polygons, so you can paint it with polypaint. You can add texture. So yeah, so the mesh, definitely you can paint it. By creating the T-pose using the ZBrush button, does that mean you still retain the original symmetric T-pose? Yeah, so hopefully I answered that question, Comic Legend. Yes, I'm using Transpose Master as the plugin. Where you're doing the refinements to the pose, you only use the Move tool as to not mess with the sculpt topology. I use a variety of brushes. At this point, it's again like it's a sculpting, so you can potentially just clean everything and smooth everything. Go to the high subdivision level and go with a clay brush and sculpting the refinements. It's just sculpting. No, I don't treat that process as a different thing. To me, it's just like if you were working on something and you messed, or you make like something wrong and you go back and fix it. It is the same thing, just knowing that when you get to the posing stage and you pose the character, things are gonna break. I mean, this is a very simple pose and a very simple character, so it's not, overcomplicating it, the pose. But if you have something very extreme and very dynamic pose, I would treat it as another base mesh that you have to go back and tweak with any sculpting brush. You can use the Move brush. In fact, there is a really cool brush, just so that you don't mess with the topology if you have a clean topology. And I use this quite a bit, but I just don't remember where it is. Hang on, here we go, the Notch brush. So the Notch brush is kind of like a Move brush, but it doesn't maintain the strength of the Move brush, and it kind of like does it along the already defined geometry. So with the Notch brush, all you do is notch points or notch vertex, which, so let me just give you a quick example of this. because this is actually really powerful stuff. Uh, Let me just do it in this one, and I'm gonna delete the layers or bake it. Right. So with polyframe, so with the move brush, I'm gonna try to show you from this angle maybe. And this is just to wrap up. So have a look at this profile, right? And if I go to the move brush and I start like pushing things, to fix the geometry a bit, eventually I can just change the actual profile or the volumes of this mesh. Whereas if I use the notch brush, it's just gonna notch the polygons around the surface. So I can do it very strongly. So I can quite literally change the topology flow, but it's gonna be very, very subtle. I'm just putting a lot of pressure here, and it's not doing it as strong as the move brush. So this is a really powerful brush, the notch brush, just to notch things in place. Obviously I screwed up this, but hopefully you get the idea. All right, so let's do a quick render of this guy, and we'll leave it there. All right, guys. So it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you next week. Hopefully, we'll finish this character by then. It's been a while, but it's certainly fun to do and interact with you guys. Um, I'm gonna be sharing with you guys some really cool stuff very soon. I've been sharing some tips and some stuff through my newsletter, and if you already got the compositing guide or the PDF to compositing, which is the cheat sheet for compositing, you can get that into. I'll share the link, or you can go to the ZBrush Guides website, and it should be one of the latest guides. So if you're in there, I'm gonna be sharing some tips that have been something that I've been sort of preparing for a long time, and recently I've been just like fine tuning it, and I'm just sharing it through there if you're interested. But yeah, other than that, I'll see you guys next week. Happy ZBrushing.